Destiny's argument after he gets smacked, his audience coping is like, oh, Rob lied about using AI. Rob lied about using AI. I have destroyed Destiny multiple times.
Yep.
I think that it's funny. Like, Destiny's an intelligent person. He's a good debater. He really is. But like, his worldview is so inconsistent. Want to talk about someone who accuses others of what he himself's doing? How many times have you heard Destiny have to backtrack that he's basically called for the censorship of people that he politically disagrees with? How many times are we going to listen to him make dog whistles or excuses for violent actions and then against politicians he doesn't believe? And then when pressed on it, be like, haha, just joking, lols. It's absurdity after absurdity with him, and he can't defend his position. You go back and watch a debate I had with him in 2022 about, partially through Biden's administration, who was more successful, Biden or Trump's administration. And over and over, he keeps yelling source to me, and then I provide a source that says exactly what I'm saying, and then he moves on and deflects like that's not a thing. What's the thing he accused me of after the debate to his audience? Rob will never admit he's wrong and constantly change the subject when he's proven wrong, just concede it, change the subject, and then rapidly move on. The exact same thing that he's accusing me of is, in fact, what he did during that debate. So, I mean, for me, if I had a chance to confront Destiny, which I won't anymore because he's blacklisted me after the last spanking that I gave him.
By the way, he blacklisted you because after that 5-hour debate, which, by the way, I was talking about before I went on stream, it's an amazing one, by the way. He booted you out of his stream, by the way, right?
Yep.
He booted your ass out and then said, I'm never going to fucking interact with Rob, even though he said, Rob, I actually like you much more than engaging with Andrew Wilson. You're more good faith, etc. You beat him on this 5 hours into it, and now you're blacklisted completely. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So here's the truth. No one owes me anything to debate me or anything like that. One of the things you see happen on this sphere is, in fact, let's take out the online debate sphere. Just think of it this way. If you're an incumbent politician and you're polling at like 80% and you know you're going to win the election and someone primaries you and you know they basically don't have a prayer, are you taking the debate with them? Probably not, because at that point, all you got to do is not have any egg on your face and you're going to win and running away. But if you're that person that's the up-and-comer, you want the debate. Well, the same's true of these sort of online spaces. If you're an established person that supposedly has a name that you're this really good debater, it doesn't matter if you're right-wing or left-wing, and you got tens of thousands of people watching you, are you going to take a chance to debate a nobody? Well, you may, right, because you think they're a nobody and you'll be able to smack them around. But are you going to talk to someone who's not a nobody, but well-known, who's damn good at debate and has a far less audience than you? You'll debate people that you think are good at debate, but that's because you see a benefit. So, for example, Destiny may very well think Charlie Kirk is a very good debater, but there's an advantage to debating Charlie Kirk, which he's a big name, and so there'll be a lot of eyeballs. I'm not. And so what happened is Destiny realized over and over in interactions he had with me over and over that I was a very good debater. In his heart of hearts, he probably doesn't think Rob beats me in every debate, but he knows it's a damn challenge. And what's the benefit that he gets out of it? Almost nothing. And so when that happened with this 5-hour debate, my entire perspective on this debate was in reaction to Destiny's grousing about his debate with Andrew Wilson. Destiny, who originally said, January 6th clearly being blown out of proportion, this clearly was an insurrection, et cetera, started to realize that they couldn't run on Joe Biden's record because it was so abysmal, therefore Kamala Harris's record as well. And so they had to make the election about Trump being a dictator, authoritarian. Oh my God, the Supreme Court made Trump God, king, January 6th, blah, blah, blah. That was the strategy that Destiny and all of his little orbiters were going into the 2024 election. And that's why when you saw me debate them, I said every single debate, they will not be able to defend Kamala's record on the economy. They will not be able to defend her record on foreign policy. They will not be able to defend the record on the border. And so instead, it's going to be about democracy. That's what they're going to talk about because they have nothing to run on. And that's exactly what happened. And that's exactly why they lost, because the American people realized that it was a farce, that their records were terrible on the issues that mattered to them, the border, the economy, foreign policy. They sucked. That's why they lost. In addition to that, Kamala Harris was very incompetent and Joe Biden was a vegetable. So anyways, when Destiny, as he's doing the January 6th thing, takes this debate with Andrew Wilson, I talked to Andrew before the debate. And I was like, listen, the debate was on January 6th and wasn't an insurrection. And I was like, my feeling is if I was having this debate, I don't really give a shit what the definition of the word insurrection is. What I care about is the left is broadening that definition so far to include January 6th that the problem would be if once we accept that, it would include hundreds of other actions which the left supported. And so therefore it becomes a problem of selective outrage, right? If you say, my God, insurrection, anyone who engaged could never run for office. Okay, then Kamala Harris supporting a bail fund for the firebomber or for the riot that resulted in the firebombing of a police station would be an insurrection. And Andrew Wilson in that debate that was his argument. I'm not saying I gave him the argument. He agreed with me. He's like, yeah. So Destiny like gives this definition of insurrection that includes 4 planks. For those that didn't see the debate, basically it's so broad that he is forced under cross-examination by Andrew Wilson to admit that if 3 hippies got together and protested marijuana laws and one of them shoved a police officer, that's an insurrection. Right. That's how broad of a definition that Destiny was using. And Andrew's like, I don't care. Then sure, we'll call January 6th an insurrection. But that definition's a joke. And Destiny pouted for weeks that you have to give your definition. And Andrew's like, no, I don't. All I have to do is say your definition's shit. And it's too broad and it's being selective, which I agree with Andrew. So when they asked me to do that debate, I was like, sure, I'll do that debate. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty and but
wait, they asked you to do it then, Rob?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So okay, if you want the full story, what happened was Pisco and this other guy, I can't remember. I think he told me he's a linguistics expert. They wanted me to debate what is the quote standard legal definition of the word insurrection. My argument is I don't give a shit. That's my argument. I don't think there is a standard legal definition, not in the context that they're talking about, because no one's been charged with it since like 1850, right?
And none of the January 6ers were charged with insurrection neither.
Right. And there are incident after incident we could see, because the definition that they're going to give, I would be able to point dozens of instances during the Vietnam War, for example, during World War II, other protests that resulted in riots, etc., that we could call insurrections, yet no one was ever charged in 140 years with anything related to that. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was never applied. No one was ever kicked off the ballot, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're right that this is the standard legal definition, why hasn't it been charged? I would argue that this was something that they were uniquely concerned about after the Civil War, right? And then as time went by, they were like, we're not. So in other words, the standard legal definition changed to something that we rarely use or haven't used since then, because the courts didn't think that it was a big issue to put that label on things and to use those sorts of laws. That's what I would say. But I don't really care what the court's definition is. What I care for is that we see people in the courts and in the Democratic Party that are arguing for these laws that haven't been used since like the 1840s, 1850s, that are selectively trying to use it to use lawfare to stop Donald Trump from being on the ballot so that they could by default win the election. That's what I care about. And these same people won't say the same thing when it came to left-wingers or Democrats that, quote, engaged in the insurrection of Black Lives Matter or Antifa that we saw all over the country. And so that's what my argument. So I agreed with Pisco. I will do that debate if we split the debate in half, and the second portion of that is the double standard and what I see in all of these, quote, left-wing insurrections based on your same definition that we never suggested kicking people off the ballot. Pisco agrees. Unfortunately, because of the nature of my work, I was working and then going on vacation and going back to work again. So I literally wasn't going to be home for like 10 days in a row. So Pisco sent me some sources. I sent him a couple things I would say, very cordial. Destiny, about 3 days in, messages me and says, hey, would you be interested in debating the definition of insurrection? I said, sure. I was already going to do a similar debate with Pisco, but yeah, I'd be happy to do it. Unfortunately, I'm going to be busy for like the next 7 days. I'll let you know when I'm on. As soon as I got off, like, you know, I'm eating lunch with my wife, I message him and say, hey, when do you want to do that debate tonight? He says, sure. Okay. So that's how it all went down. I didn't have time to do a significant amount of research. I told him that. I say it on the debate. I say to him,
you went in there kind of like not even fucking doing your full-on research against Destiny, and you allowed it. You said, okay,
that's right. Let's go. No excuses. I said, sure, no problem. One of the problems is I'm lazy and probably wouldn't have researched anyways. But you know, but nonetheless, I didn't have time. It's legitimate. Right. He knew it. Pisco knew it. Everyone knew it. Right. Destiny, on the other hand, this was his pet project. He was writing a manifesto on January 6th, and he did all this research. Cool, great.
Yeah.
I went in that debate, and if you go to the beginning, you can hear me say this. I was like, listen, I know you were angry that Andrew Wilson wouldn't give you a definition. I'll give you a definition. You could interrogate my definition all you want. However, all I ask is that I be given a large amount of time or a near equal amount of time after this to talk about my issue, which is the double standard. The exact same offer that I gave to Pisco to be willing to, he agreed. Right. Destiny agreed. We go back and forth for like 4.5 hours. By the time it gets to talk about the double standard, he rage quits like 15 minutes in and then says, I'm blacklisting Rob because 2.5 hours previously he used ChatGPT. That's his argument.
I remember that story, by the way, Rob. Apparently there was a bunch of, I remember seeing videos that you're using ChatGPT, therefore you're disqualified in some way. Now it's funny because I've debated people. I say, go ahead and ask ChatGPT. I don't really care. Ask Gronk. I don't care. We can do the same standards if you want. I don't give a shit. What was the case there where they were shaming you and the Destiny orbiters were saying Rob Noor is not legit? He follows ChatGPT in some way. I don't understand what the logic there is. What was that all about,
a lot
bro?
of what Destiny says is just what his audience is telling him at the time, which I actually got Pisco to admit later that he was messaging Destiny what to say during the debate, which is funny from a guy, which is funny from a guy whose entire argument to me is, well, you should have done more research, even though I told him I didn't have time for it and didn't research. And that makes me a terrible person because I used AI. What happened was when I was debating Pisco, the author, or thought I was going to debate Pisco, the author that he was using, which Destiny cribbed from Pisco, because the irony is on these particular like legal questions of the legal definition of insurrection, Destiny basically sucks and he's just cribbing his argument from Pisco is a little better, right? And Destiny knows that and Pisco knows that too, but Pisco couldn't say it because they were in a business relationship. But now he can say it because, you know, Destiny doesn't really appreciate consent. I'll just leave it at that.
So sure.
So anyways, like what happened was Pisco's like, hey, here's the author I'm going to use for my definition. Their names were Bowden Paulson. So I went and I checked out the paper. It was like 100-something pages long. I don't have a computer. I'm at work. I do home healthcare. So I get like 10 minutes here and there to check my phone. I'm not going to read a 100-something page thing on my phone when I get 10 minutes downtime at work. So what I did when I was laying in bed, I was like, hey, I'll look up a couple abstracts because I had a couple key questions. Now, I'm smart enough to know that the debate between me and Pisco is inevitably going to come down to, I'm going to say there were a bunch of things that meet the definition of insurrection that Antifa or Chaz or Black Lives Matter did, and there were Democrats that supported those groups, and yet you didn't call for them to be kicked off the ballot, to which Pisco's argument is going to be, but those were state insurrections and not national insurrections. That's going to be his argument. So the question that I wanted answered is, what did your author about insurrection say about the difference between state and national insurrections? The first question was, did they say state insurrections can occur? And the second question was, did they say Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to state insurrections or only to national insurrections? Now, regardless of what they said, it makes no logical sense why it wouldn't apply to a state insurrection. Because if I'm insurrecting against the state of Pennsylvania, by ipso facto, I'm also insurrecting against the United States.
It's America.
Because the state of Pennsylvania is part of the United States. And so therefore, post-Civil War, if I try to overthrow the legitimately elected government of Georgia because Georgia's become anti-slavery and I want slavery back, why wouldn't that disqualify me from federal office as well?
From federal office,
But nonetheless, it doesn't matter. I wanted to see what these authors said. I read three or four articles, right? I didn't have time to send them to my computer, so I screenshotted them. So when I got home to my computer, I could type in the keywords in the screenshot, bring it up my computer, save it in my folder where I save evidence for when I'm going to do debates. That's the idea. One of the things I did was I went to Claude AI and I said, what do Bowden Paulson think about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? Does it apply to state level insurrections? I spelled the name wrong. And so instead of Bowden Paulson, it said, yes, Lawrence Tribe does think that blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, not Lawrence Tribe, but Bowden Paulson. And it said, no, they don't think so. And then I put one more prompt and was like, is that what they said in their paper, the scope and force of Section 3, which was the title of the paper? And it said, well, no, actually, they did say that states would apply. That was it. I messaged Pisco and said, hey, I think that you're wrong, that they do say this. He's like, you might want to read that more carefully. I don't think that's the case. Anyways, I'm now in this debate with Destiny. I say, hey, can state insurrections happen? He says no. And I'm like, well, I think they can happen. And I think Section 3 would apply. I think your author says that, but I certainly think the state insurrections could apply. He's like, where's your evidence or something? And I'm like, well, this is what your authors say. And I pull up the screenshots on my phone. I thought I was reading from one of the articles I screenshotted, but it was the AI. Doesn't matter anyways. He was like, well, what's this from? I was like, it was like an abstract or a summary I read. He's like, oh, okay. So we go through it for like 2 minutes and he's like, well, wait a minute. Is this like an AI? I was like, oh, he says, is this ChatGPT? I was like, no, I think it's Claude. And he's like, it doesn't matter if it is anyways. Let's go to the Bowden Paulson paper. We go to the Bowden Paulson paper. He concedes, yeah, you're right. It does say there could be state insurrections. Great. We proceed to debate for another 2.5 hours. Destiny's argument after he gets smacked, his audience coping is like, oh, Rob lied about using AI. Rob lied about using AI. So the next day he goes on his channel and like he always does, he just cribs what his audience was saying was like, I'm never going to debate Rob Noor again. He's blacklisted because he used AI. Meanwhile, he didn't read the freaking articles that he's claiming. He didn't even read the court decisions that he's claiming to have read. And he's listening to his audience like Pisco feeding him lines the entire time. What's more shameful? And this is one of the arguments the Destiny supporters say to me all the time. They're like, well, why would you take that debate without doing research? And I was like, let's assume you're right, that makes me a terrible person. But here's the
Sure.
thing. Destiny didn't read that paper either because he had no idea what they said about state insurrections. So
Yep.
what's worse, the guy writing the manifesto that says I read all this shit that clearly didn't, or me admitting up front, I didn't read this paper. I did almost no research. But this is what I think it says. Let's go to the source material and see. So what it was it was cope because he knew that he got blown out. And it wasn't, and you have to imagine he got blown out on the topic of his choice when we were talking exclusively about what he wanted to talk about the definition of insurrection. We didn't even get to the part where it would be offense on my part, which is talking about the double standard and how it's applied. And he still looked bad. He looked mad. He got mad because he got called out on not understanding what the Colorado decision that he's basing so much of his argument about that suggested keeping Trump off the ballot. He didn't know what the definition of insurrection that they gave was. He got called out on it, and he did not know that they didn't give an official definition, which, by the way, was a mistake I had made previously in a debate I had with Pisco. And I was shocked when I found out that actually the Colorado court never did say. They were like, here is some definitions of the word insurrection, but we think any definition of the word insurrection January 6th would have met. So we're not going to pick one definition.
One of the others. There's multiple.
Right. And so I was shocked. I was like, wow, they didn't even give a definition of what they think it was. And so when Destiny's like, well, it gave like a 4-tier, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, dude, they didn't give a definition. They didn't. Right. And so he got frustrated. And he even said, someone sent me the clip because I don't give a shit. But so he said, the thing that pisses me off the most is Rob pretending I didn't read this stuff and he read more than me. I never said I read more than him. I did say that he bullshitted about how much he read, which is shameful when that's your whole shtick and you're writing a manifesto and you're the big man. The reason he debated me the first time on January 6th was he was prepping for a debate with Glenn Greenwald and Alex Jones. I was more than happy to be his prep. I didn't mind. That prep debate probably got me recognized by Tim Pool and got me on Tim Pool's show. So, hey, it mutually benefited both of us. I don't care. Great. But the idea that it's like, this was this guy's whole shtick that he was going around the country and he's going to debate everyone and everyone's afraid to debate him on this topic because he's done so much research and he's full of shit. He certainly read a lot, but the problem is he didn't read thoroughly the very source documents that he's relying on. He read people opining about it, but he didn't read the source document, which is excusable if like me and you are having a debate or whoever this mystery opponent that's going to come on. We're not all experts. We have full-time jobs. Many of us, you don't expect everyone to have read everything, but if you're claiming, whoa, this is the big issue and I'm writing a manifesto on it, then I would think at the very least the court documents that you're citing, I mean, they're not that many pages. I read the Colorado court decision. You didn't have time to read it. It's just nonsensical. So that's the story in a nutshell. I don't give two shits about Destiny. He doesn't owe me anything at all. Right. I don't give a shit. Right. But I'm unimpressed. Right. With the idea that he's got to make this big bullshit story about how, Rob used ChatGPT 2.5 hours earlier. And so therefore he's bad faith and I'm never going to debate him again. Meanwhile, he's off there debating Andrew Wilson. Why? Because Andrew's a big audience and I'm not. That's it.